The lights dim. The crowd falls silent. And then, through the soft haze of blue stage light, a familiar figure steps forward. Neil Diamond, 84 years old, moves slowly, one careful step at a time. His hands tremble slightly, but when he lifts the microphone, the room feels the same as it did half a century ago. For a moment, time holds its breath, and then it happens. That voice, deep, roughened by years but still unmistakable, fills the theater once more. Sweet Caroline. The audience answers back in tears and laughter, their voices shaking between joy and heartbreak. Few realize that this moment was not a comeback. It was a farewell. In 2018, Neil Diamond shocked the world when he announced he was ending his touring career. The reason was not scandal, not exhaustion, but something far more human: Parkinson's disease. A cruel illness that slowly silences the very things that make life worth living. For Neil, that meant the rhythm, the movement, the music. What happens to a man whose entire identity is built on a voice when that voice begins to fade? How does the man who gave sound to millions face the silence within himself? This is not just the story of fame and loss. It is the story of what happens after the applause stops. Neil Diamond's journey began in the crowded streets of Brooklyn, and it carried him to the world's biggest stages. He became the sound of weddings, of heartbreaks, of entire generations who grew up believing that his songs understood them better than they understood themselves. But behind the shimmering jackets and the perfect smiles, there was a loneliness that fame could never erase. He once said, "I'm not a showman. I'm a man who hides behind the show." And that is where his truth lived, somewhere between the light and the loneliness. When the news of his illness broke, fans wept not only because the music would stop, but because they suddenly realized how much of their own lives were written inside his songs. Sweet Caroline, I Am, I Said, Solitary Man. These weren't just hits, they were confessions. Each lyric was a mirror, each performance a struggle to be seen for who he really was beneath the glitter. In that sense, Neil Diamond's tragedy isn't about disease or aging. It's about a man who gave his whole self to the stage, and one day had to learn who he was without it. Hollywood often celebrates eternal youth, flawless beauty, the illusion of immortality. But Neil's story cuts deeper. It reminds us that the most powerful thing an artist can do is not to shine forever, but to step away with grace, even as the lights fade. When he sang for the last time in New Zealand, his voice cracked on the final note. The crowd stood in silence. No encore, no confetti. Just a man whispering goodbye to the only life he had ever known. Later that night, he told his tour manager quietly, "It's over, but the songs will live." And they have. At 84, Neil Diamond still hums to himself in his Colorado home. He still writes a line or two on a napkin. The melody may falter, but the music never left him. Because for Neil, the music was never just about performance. It was about connection. The unseen thread that tied a lonely boy from Brooklyn to millions around the world. This is the untold story of that boy, of the man he became, and of what really happened when the music had to stop. Before the fame, before the spotlight, before the world began to sing his songs, there was just a quiet boy named Neil Leslie Diamond, born January 24th, 1941, in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up in a small apartment shared with his parents, Rose and Akiba Diamond, and his younger brother, Harvey. His father served in the army and later ran a small dry goods store. His mother worked as a homemaker. The family had little, but they had music. On Sunday mornings, his mother would hum Yiddish lullabies while cleaning the kitchen. Neil would sit nearby, fascinated by how sound could fill an empty room. He was shy, not the kind of boy you'd expect to command stadiums one day. He didn't play sports, he didn't chase popularity. Instead, he found comfort in words. In his teenage years, he filled notebooks with half-finished poems and simple rhymes about loneliness, hope, and love, long before he even touched a guitar. Then, one afternoon, something changed. Neil attended a concert at Erasmus Hall High School. The performer was folk legend Pete Seeger. The moment Seeger began to sing, something awakened in him. The audience wasn't just listening. They were part of the song. Hundreds of strangers singing in unison, breathing the same rhythm. Neil would later say that it felt like the air itself was alive. That night, he went home and wrote his first melody. It wasn't very good, but it was his. Still, the idea of becoming a musician seemed impossible. His parents wanted stability. They encouraged him to study medicine, a path that promised safety in a world that didn't offer much. So Neil enrolled at New York University on a fencing scholarship, majoring in pre-med. But the classroom walls couldn't contain him. Between lectures, he spent hours in the music rooms, scribbling lyrics instead of lab notes. Then came a defining moment, one that would haunt him for years. During his senior year, with just 10 credits left to graduate, Neil dropped out. He walked away from college and from the life his parents had dreamed for him. He didn't tell anyone that he had already made up his mind after a summer spent working in a small publishing company on Tin Pan Alley, the birthplace of American pop songwriting. Inside that cramped building, Neil found his calling. The sound of typewriters, pianos, and voices echoing through paper-thin walls. It was chaos. But to him, it felt like destiny. He started writing songs for other artists, often paid just $10 or $15 per tune. Most were never recorded. Some were laughed at. But he didn't stop. Every rejection pushed him closer to his own voice. He once said, "I learned to fail faster than anyone I knew." It was during this time that he wrote a simple song called "Hear Them Bells." It wasn't a hit, but it was the first song that made him believe he could be more than just a writer for hire. Fact rarely told, in 1963, Neil briefly signed with Columbia Records, his first major deal. But after only 4 months, he was dropped. The label executives told him bluntly, "You don't have a hit in you." That night, Neil sat on the fire escape of his small apartment in Brooklyn, guitar on his lap, and promised himself he would prove them wrong. He went broke. He played in tiny clubs, sold furniture to buy studio time, and borrowed money from friends to record demos that no one wanted. Yet beneath the struggle, there was something forming. A sound that blended the storytelling of folk, the energy of rock, and the soul of pop. That voice, half gravel and half honey, was waiting for its moment. Neil Diamond was not chasing fame. He was chasing belonging. The kind of belonging he once felt in that auditorium when strangers sang together. And he would spend the next decade trying to recreate that feeling, not just for himself, but for the whole world. He didn't know it yet, but the heartbreaks, the loneliness, and the endless nights in New York's cheap apartments were all preparing him for the song that would define his life, Solitary Man. Before that, though, he had to endure something that every artist faces, the silence that comes before the world finally listens.
Rejection is supposed to end a dream, but for Neil Diamond, it became the beginning of one. After being dropped by Columbia Records, he sank into one of the darkest periods of his life. He was 24, broke, and nearly invisible in a city that seemed to feed on broken ambition. During the day, he wandered up and down Broadway, knocking on doors of publishers and record labels. At night, he wrote, not for anyone else anymore, but for himself. He slept little, ate less. He called those years the long hallway. a time when you can see the light at the end, but never get any closer. He'd sit at his old upright piano, often in the same rumpled shirt, writing until dawn. Dozens of songs, hundreds of lyrics, all unanswered letters to a world that didn't seem to care. And then came a small break that would quietly change everything. A tiny publishing company on the corner of Broadway called Screen Gems offered him a contract to write for other artists. The pay was terrible, $50 a week, but it was a lifeline. Through that door, Neil began learning what made a song live or die. He watched other writers shape hits in minutes, but he also saw how the industry stripped away sincerity for formula. That's when he made himself a promise. If I ever have a hit, it will be honest. And soon, he did. In 1966, the Monkees, the world's most famous made-for-TV band, recorded one of his songs, I'm a Believer. It was bright, catchy, and exploded across radio stations worldwide. In just 2 weeks, it became the biggest-selling single in America. For the first time, Neil Diamond could pay his rent, but deep down, he felt uneasy. The song had brought him money, but not meaning. He realized that no one knew he had written it, and worse, no one cared. He wanted to be the voice behind his own words. That same year, he walked into a small studio and recorded a song that was nothing like the pop hits of the time. It was slower, sadder, and brutally honest. Melinda was mine till the time that I found her. The song was Solitary Man. It was his confession set to music, a portrait of a man who had given everything to the idea of love, only to be left with himself. He later admitted, "That was me, naked. That was the first time I sang the truth." Radio stations didn't know what to make of it at first. The voice was too deep, too serious. But listeners heard something different, a rawness that pop music had forgotten. Slowly, it climbed the charts. Neil Diamond had arrived. But even as his name began to appear on billboards, the struggle wasn't over. Fame, like love, came with its own kind of loneliness. He signed with Bang Records, who pushed him to write catchier songs. When he refused to compromise his sound, they shelved several of his recordings. Once again, Neil found himself fighting for artistic control of his own music. Fact few people know. During this conflict, Neil secretly started recording under a pseudonym, producing tracks on his own dime just to keep his voice alive. One of those sessions birthed the song Cherry Cherry, which would later become his breakout solo hit. When Cherry Cherry hit radio, the shift was immediate. Critics called it electric sincerity. Audiences called it the new American sound. He was no longer writing for others, he was defining an era. From that moment, Neil Diamond's songwriting evolved from the personal to the universal. His music began to echo the voice of an entire generation caught between post-war idealism and urban isolation. He wasn't just writing love songs anymore, he was writing about being human. And that humanity became his weapon. By the end of the 60s, Neil had turned every rejection into rhythm, every wound into melody. But the revolution wasn't complete yet. The 70s would soon open a door that fame and pain would both walk through. Because when the spotlight finally found him, Neil Diamond discovered that the thing he wanted most, connection, would become the thing that cost him almost everything.
The 70s did not just make Neil Diamond famous, they made him unforgettable. When the decade began, he was 30 years old, his hair still dark and his eyes heavy from the years of struggle. Yet the moment he walked onto a stage, everything about him changed. His songs carried an emotional honesty that pop music had forgotten, and people felt it immediately. Sweet Caroline,
Cracklin' Rosie, Songs Sung Blue. None of these songs were written to become anthems, but they did. They were simple, sincere, and human. Neil never thought of himself as a rock star. He once said, "I'm just a storyteller with a guitar," but audiences disagreed. By 1972, he was selling out stadiums across America. At Madison Square Garden, 20,000 people sang his lyrics word for word. Neil looked out at them and whispered to himself, "I'm not alone anymore." But deep down, he knew that he still was. Behind the applause and the glittering lights was a man who lived in silence. He didn't party, didn't chase the fame he already had. When the shows ended, he went back to his hotel room and ordered dinner for one. He later said fame was a beautiful kind of loneliness. The success was staggering. He became one of the highest-paid performers in the world, with platinum albums, record-breaking tours, and a following that stretched across continents. He even starred in a film, the 1980 remake of The Jazz Singer, a story about a man torn between faith, family, and fame. Neil didn't have to act much. It was already his life. But his devotion to music came with a cost. His first marriage to Jane Posner, his high school sweetheart, ended quietly. Then came Marcia Murphy, a television producer who grounded him when fame became too heavy to bear. For a while, she was his calm in the storm. They had 2 sons, and for a time, life looked perfect. But perfection rarely lasts when you live on the road. By the late 70s, Neil was performing almost 200 nights a year. Home was a collection of hotel rooms, and love was a voice on the phone between shows. The marriage began to fracture under the weight of distance. And one night, after a long silence between them, he wrote a song that captured that ache, "You Don't Bring Me Flowers." It began as a personal confession, a letter he never meant to send. But when Barbra Streisand, his former high school classmate, recorded it as a duet with him, the song became a phenomenon. It was both a hit and a heartbreak immortalized. Every lyric of that decade carried something of his own pain. "I Am, I Said," was his most personal confession, written in Los Angeles when he felt torn between fame and identity. "I am, I said, to no one there," he wrote. It was a cry for meaning from a man who had everything, yet felt unseen. As his fame grew, Neil began to hide behind the spectacle. The sparkling sequined shirts, the velvet jackets, the spotlight, they weren't vanity, they were armor. The stage had become both his home and his hiding place. Those who knew him said he was kind, but distant, always half inside another song. His music defined moments in people's lives: weddings, baseball games, graduations, quiet nights in bars. Sweet Caroline became an anthem for joy itself, but Neil rarely sang it offstage. When asked why, he answered softly, "It belongs to the people now." That was his paradox. He had given the world its soundtrack, but somewhere in the process, he had lost his own. In an interview with Rolling Stone in 1977, he said, "I can make 20,000 people happy in one night, but I can't always make one person understand me." Those words revealed more truth than any lyric he had ever written. By the end of the decade, the pressure of perfection and the endless demand for new hits began to crush him. He withdrew from interviews, spent more time alone, and started questioning everything he had built. Fame, he realized, was not freedom. It was another form of captivity. The world saw a legend rising, but inside, Neil Diamond was beginning to fade. The 80s would bring more albums, more tours, and millions more fans. But behind the applause, a deeper silence was forming. A silence that no music could fill. Because for Neil Diamond, the real struggle was not how to become a star, it was how to remain human after he did.
By the early 80s, Neil Diamond had everything he once dreamed of: fame, fortune, adoration, and respect. Yet the more success he achieved, the less he recognized himself.
He had spent 2 decades chasing applause, but now the sound of it only made him tired. When the lights dimmed and the music faded, there was only silence. He began to withdraw, quietly and deliberately. Friends noticed he was speaking less, smiling less, and spending long stretches of time alone. He still performed with the same energy, still gave every crowd the illusion of joy, but when the curtain closed, the loneliness returned like a tide. Fame, he would later admit, had left him spiritually empty. "I was living a dream," he said, "but it wasn't mine anymore." For a while, he tried to fill that emptiness with work. He wrote more songs, recorded more albums, and toured endlessly. But the exhaustion caught up with him. He was no longer writing from inspiration, he was writing to survive. In 1987, during the recording of Headed for the Future, Neil confessed to a friend that he felt like a man running out of road. He had reached every milestone, but could not find peace. His second marriage, already strained by years of distance, began to fall apart. In 1995, it ended after 25 years. The divorce settlement was reported to be one of the largest in history at that time, around $150 million. Yet Neil said he didn't regret it. "She gave me 2 sons and a home when I had neither. You can't put a price on that." After that, he vanished from public view. For almost 2 years, he disappeared from the stage completely. No tours, no interviews, no explanations. Fact few people know, during that quiet period, Neil was living in a remote cabin in Colorado, undergoing therapy for severe depression. He never admitted it publicly until 2008 in a rare interview with CBS. "I thought I had everything," he said, "but I couldn't feel anything." He would wake before sunrise, make coffee, and sit at the piano without playing a note. Some mornings, he stared at the keys for hours. The man who had filled the world with music could no longer find a single melody that felt true. But from that silence, something began to grow. A fragile honesty he had buried beneath decades of performance. In 2005, after years of near isolation, Neil met producer Rick Rubin, the man who had revived Johnny Cash's career in his final years. Rubin didn't want the polished star. He wanted the man behind the armor. He told Neil to strip everything down. No strings, no background singers, no glitter. Just him, a guitar, and the truth. The result was the album 12 Songs. It was haunting, raw, and painfully sincere. For many, it was the first time they had truly heard Neil Diamond. Critics called it the rebirth of an artist, but Neil himself called it my goodbye. He wasn't sure how much longer he could perform. The long nights, the travel, the repetition, it all felt heavier now. Yet there was a quiet gratitude in him that hadn't been there before. He said, "When you've been to the top, you think the view is what matters, but it's the climb that gives life meaning." Even as the world celebrated his return, he knew something inside his body was changing. The tremors began slowly, barely noticeable at first. A shaking hand, a missed note, then more. The doctors confirmed what he feared: Parkinson's disease. When he received the diagnosis, Neil didn't tell anyone for months. He continued performing, determined to finish his 50th anniversary tour. But night after night, he struggled more to keep balance, to remember lyrics, to move the way he once did. Still, he refused to let the illness define him. He told his band, "We'll keep going until the music says stop." In early 2018, in the middle of his tour in Australia and New Zealand, the music finally said stop. After a particularly difficult performance, he called the crew together backstage. His voice was calm, but everyone could sense the weight behind it. He said, "It's over." The next morning, a public statement appeared online. Neil Diamond was retiring from touring, effective immediately, due to Parkinson's disease. The world reacted with shock and heartbreak. Tributes poured in from every corner of the industry. Fans who had grown up with his music wept openly. Concertgoers from that final tour said they could feel something in the air that night, an unspoken goodbye. One of his crew members later shared a quiet moment from that evening. After the crowd left, Neil stood alone on stage, staring out at the empty seats. He whispered, "The music will outlive me." Then he placed the microphone down and walked away. For Neil Diamond, silence had come full circle. But this time it wasn't the silence of loneliness, it was acceptance. He had found peace not in the spotlight, but beyond it, in the stillness that he had once terrified him. The man who once sang "Solitary Man" had finally made peace with solitude.
The announcement came quietly, almost like a whisper. A single post from his official website in January 2018. Neil Diamond will retire from touring due to a recent diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. The news stunned the world. There was no scandal, no dramatic press conference, just the truth, gentle, human, and heartbreaking. For 50 years, Neil Diamond had given his voice to the world. Now, that voice was beginning to slip away. Parkinson's is not a sudden storm. It's a slow, unrelenting tide. It takes movement first, then rhythm, then the certainty of your own body. For a man whose entire life had been built on timing, on the rise and fall of melody, it was a quiet cruelty. In the days following his announcement, thousands of fans flooded his website and social media pages with messages of love. Letters came from across the world, from soldiers who sang Sweet Caroline in the desert, from couples who had danced to You Don't Bring Me Flowers at their weddings, from strangers who said his music had carried them through grief and loss. Neil read as many of them as he could. Then, after a long pause, he said softly to his wife Katie, "I never knew they were listening this closely." Behind closed doors, the struggle continued. The tremors worsened. Some days, even holding a guitar felt impossible. But he refused to let the disease take away what it couldn't touch: his gratitude. He told a friend, "I can't tour anymore, but I can still sing to myself, and that's enough." His final concert came just before the announcement, in Christchurch, New Zealand. The air was warm, the sky turning gold as the lights came up. When he walked on stage, the crowd roared with love, unaware that they were witnessing his last performance. He struggled that night. His steps were slower, his movements smaller. The guitar hung heavier than usual. But when the first notes of Sweet Caroline began, something remarkable happened. The audience started to sing before he did. Neil smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. He let them carry the chorus, just standing there, eyes glistening, listening to thousands of voices lift the song that had once made him immortal. When the final note faded, he simply whispered, "Thank you." No encore, no grand exit, just a man saying goodbye to the only home he had ever known, the stage. Backstage, he sat down quietly, looked at his hands, and said to his manager, "It's over, but the songs will live." And they did. What followed was not disappearance, but transformation. Neil began to focus on his health, on writing quietly, on finding peace in smaller moments. He spent mornings in his garden, afternoons reading, and evenings humming unfinished melodies. The man who had once lived through chaos now found meaning in stillness. But even in retirement, the world did not forget him. In 2019, he was honored at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., recognized not just for his success, but for the emotional truth his music had given to millions. During the ceremony, a choir performed "I'm a Believer," and Neil smiled through tears. He later said, "When you're young, you write songs because you want the world to see you. When you're old, you write them because you finally see the world." Fact few people know. Despite his illness, Neil continued to record small, private sessions at home. His wife sometimes filmed him at the piano, gently singing a few lines before his hands tired. He kept those videos private, saying, "They're not for release, they're for remembrance." Every so often, he would hum a familiar melody, Sweet Caroline, Hello Again, Solitary Man, not as performance, but as prayer. For him, music had never been about perfection. It had always been about connection. Parkinson's might have taken away his movement, but it could not take away that. In his later interviews, Neil spoke with a kind of serenity. He said, "There's sadness, yes,
but I've been given more than I could ever ask for. My voice may be quieter, but my heart's still singing." And it was. In 2023, something extraordinary happened. Neil Diamond appeared unexpectedly at the opening night of A Beautiful Noise, the Broadway musical based on his life. He hadn't planned to perform, but when the lights dimmed and the audience began singing Sweet Caroline, he stood, raised the microphone, and joined in. The theater erupted. The crowd sang through tears. The cast on stage turned to face him, some of them crying openly. For a moment, time stopped again. The man who had once said goodbye to the stage was home once more. When the song ended, Neil smiled and whispered to his wife beside him, "I'm still me, just slower." That single line captured everything his fans had always loved about him: the humility, the grace, the quiet strength. Neil Diamond's farewell was never about loss. It was about acceptance. The stage lights might fade, but the music, his music, still lives in every voice that ever sang along. For a man who once feared silence, he had learned to make peace with it. Because silence, for Neil Diamond, was never the end of music. It was simply the space where his songs would continue to echo long after he was gone.
Today, Neil Diamond lives far from the noise that wants to find him. His home in Colorado is quiet, surrounded by mountains and open sky. The air is thin, the mornings are cold, and yet there is peace there, a peace he spent a lifetime searching for. Each day begins the same way. He wakes early, makes coffee, and opens the blinds to let the morning light in. Sometimes he hums a few bars of an old song, just to see if the melody still fits inside his voice. Sometimes he writes a line or two in a notebook that only he reads. The tremors in his hands are more visible now, but he no longer hides them. They are a part of the rhythm of his life. There are no more concerts, no more interviews, no rehearsals or set lists. Yet in a quiet way, he is still performing. To the trees outside his window, to the mountains that echo his voice back, to the silence that once frightened him, but now feels like an old friend. He once said, "I used to think the stage was where I belonged, but now I think belonging has nothing to do with where you stand. It's about who you stand with." That realization came late in life. Fame had made him visible to millions, but it had also made him invisible to himself. It took illness, solitude, and time for him to rediscover what he had always been looking for. Not applause, not recognition, but connection. In his later years, that connection became simpler, purer. It was in holding hands with his wife Katie, in hearing from fans who still sent letters after all these years, in seeing his grandchildren discover his songs for the first time. He once said, "The greatest honor isn't people knowing your name. It's when they sing your words like they were their own." That truth defines his legacy. When he appeared at the Broadway premiere of A Beautiful Noise, he hadn't planned to sing. But as the opening chords of Sweet Caroline began, something stirred within him. He stood, steadied himself with both hands, and began to sing. The audience rose with him, thousands of voices meeting his in harmony. For that brief moment, time dissolved. He wasn't 84. He wasn't sick. He was simply Neil Diamond again, the man who had turned loneliness into music and given the world a reason to sing. After the show, a reporter asked him how it felt to be back on stage. He smiled and said, "It felt like coming home." And that is what his story has always been, a long journey home. From a shy boy in Brooklyn to a songwriter lost among rejection slips, to the man who could make entire arenas sing in unison. From fame that isolated him, to illness that humbled him, to peace that finally set him free. Every artist, in the end, faces the same question. What remains when the music fades? For Neil Diamond, the answer was simple: gratitude.
He once reflected, "I used to chase happiness, but I learned that joy is quieter. It's not out there somewhere. It's right here, in the stillness." He no longer sings for applause. He sings because it keeps his soul awake. Those who have met him in recent years describe a man of warmth and humility. When visitors ask if he misses the stage, he smiles and says, "No, the songs are still with me. I just don't have to travel anymore." In that one line is the essence of Neil Diamond, a man who found meaning not in what he lost, but in what he learned to let go of. The world will always remember him as the voice behind Sweet Caroline, Solitary Man, and I Am, I Said. But those closest to him know that his greatest song was never recorded. It's the quiet melody of a life lived honestly, through triumph and failure, light and shadow, until all that remained was truth. Neil Diamond's story is not one of tragedy. It's one of transformation. He showed that even when the spotlight fades, the soul can still shine. That even when the voice trembles, the heart can still sing. And so, as the music plays on, in bars, in stadiums, in living rooms across the world, somewhere in Colorado, an old man smiles softly and hums along. Because for Neil Diamond, the song never ended. It simply changed its rhythm.